Hey, it's me, this guy. So I was browsing YouTube the other day when I saw this thumbnail, which really caught my interest because it features a Smite character, and Smite is one of my favorite games, as you all know. But more importantly, it's not that often that you see someone talking about Smite who isn't one of the regulars, one of the players or content creators that are already really ingrained in the Smite community. So I had to check it out, and I'm glad I did. It was a great, entertaining video, with only a few problems, which is that he had wrong opinions about my favorite game. So I wanted to respond to those. Now, of course, I recommend that you go watch the whole video, as it was very fun and entertaining, but I am going to be responding to just his opinions about Smite out of the context of the rest of the video, but as long as that's been said, let's hear what he had to say.
My go-to suggestion is Smite. Mechanically, it's a lot closer to League than it is Dota. Landing skill shots and evading damage come into play constantly, but the action camera and expanded movement make it a bit more tactile to play. Well, if it isn't my favorite Greek god, Michelangelo of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I'm gonna aim to— Just kidding, you moron! I was aiming for mid the whole time! I like this game because I can actually tell what the hell's going on. Items are simple, roles are distinct and understandable, and it's got a VGS system that people actually use.
You rock! Cancel that, you're good! Cancel that! You rock! Cancel that, you're good!
You know what? You're right. You've convinced me, my friend. VVYVG, VVGQ, VTT, VVGB. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true.
No argument here. I absolutely agree that the shift in perspective and control scheme that Smite offers is a massive baseline for what makes it stand out from other MOBAs, and in my opinion is one of the great innovations that the genre always needed, executed to excellent effect within Smite.
The best gods are ones designed tightly around a special playstyle, which is unfortunately about 10% of the characters. The rest of them are at best passably interchangeable and at worst objectively less fun than their alternatives.
Alright, here come the bold claims accompanied by nice visuals. But before you accuse me of butt-heartedly defending my excluded favorites, I only think he's half wrong. I think most Smite players have some level of conscious or non-conscious organization of the god roster very similar to this. There are gods that appeal to your style, as well as some gods whose design is near universally appreciated. I love many of the gods that he presents as fun. For example, Skadi was the first god that I got to Mastery 10, and Amaterasu was the second. Some other standouts are Guan Yu, Vulcan, Fenrir, Thanatos. I think that those are all awesome gods that lots of people love. Similarly, most players I know would not miss some gods that he disapproved of, such as Apwash, Izanami, or Bakasura. However, that's just a few ways that our preferences align. I don't think that that means that 90% of the roster weren't meant to get past the chopping block. Before I break down my major disagreement, let's hear the rest of his point.
I could shit on League's balance like Riot shit on Azir, but at least they designed champions to stand out mechanically in their role. Orianna, Twisted Fate, both mid lane champions with drastically different playstyles. Orianna moves this ball around with like 5 different functions on top of her auto attack. Twisted Fate is nothing like her. He's got a bunch of different cards, each with different effects. Vlad, Fizz, Victor, Akali. I could keep naming mid laners and you'd struggle to find an overlap in their core mechanics. Smite is not like that. Every mid laner gets a line attack and an AoE. If you're lucky, they might have a fun ultimate. The homogeneity here is ridiculous. It's by far my biggest complaint with the game, especially when its two ghostwriters did it so objectively better you'd have assumed it would rub off.
Okay, so I can't really say that I have the background to determine how accurate the League end of this analogy is, but what I will say is that as an outsider to that game, it comes off as odd. He uses these two champions as standouts of diverse design, while to me they look fairly alike. I don't mean to say that he's wrong, but I think that that's the nature of MOBA champion or god designs. To someone less familiar with Smite, all of these line abilities likely look as homogeneous as any of the League footage that I have ever seen does to me. Let's look at his Smite examples. Agni's line attack is arguably the most basic of the bunch. It's just a wall of fire. But that's because the core of his design is that all of his abilities interact powerfully with his first ability. You can always expect to take some damage if an Agni gets close enough to hit you with their flame wave, but if you're trapped in his noxious fumes, you'll get stunned as well as take bonus damage. Next is Discordia. Her first ability, Unruly Magic, has more range than Flame Wave, as well as an element of unpredictability, which are the 5 bonus projectiles that it produces. These bounce off of walls, making it exceedingly damaging if you can cast it into an enclosed space where an enemy might try to hide. Hera's Polymorph ability is one of the few abilities in the game that does just that. Turns you into a goddamn centaur or who knows what. This form of crowd control is exceptionally unique because you are rendered totally inept except the ability to move, which is usually the primary function that the crowd control is attempting to hinder. Olorun's Focused Light is an ability that you can charge up for extra range, up to double that of Agni's or Discordia's aforementioned abilities. But a skilled Olorun will know that charging it does not increase damage, which makes for a fun mind game that you can play with your enemy. When should you dodge? Will I just keep charging and hit the skill shot, or pop you right where you stand? Poseidon's Tidal Surge doubles as damage and a knockup. Knockups are known to be one of the most powerful crowd control effects in the game due to the fact that they can't be DR'd. However, Poseidon lacks the dash that Agni and Discordia do, so oftentimes you have to double utilize your Tidal Surge as both damage output and self-peel in dangerous scenarios. Finally, Raijin's Percussive Storm acts more like 3 line attacks than 1, as he beats the first, second, and then third and fourth drum in unison. The fact that he gets 3 chances to hit you with projectiles that steadily grow in size makes a single cast of his ability some difficult damage to avoid. I could go on this way about the AoE examples he gives. Anubis and Cuckoo have 2 of the most bog standard but most powerful circles in the game, while Eset's is barely comparable, as it doesn't even deal damage but inflicts a silence and provides you with a shield. Ra's ability is a blind centered on himself, and Discordia's ability is only worth much if you can hit 2 enemies at once, which inflicts madness, causing 2 enemies to fight one another. But you get the point. Now, I know that just spewing a bunch of technical jargon about the game doesn't make anyone right or wrong, but ultimately, I'm trying to prove that the homogeneous appearance of Smite's gods is only surface level. Without getting too deep into the complex relationship that Smite's classes and roles have, all the gods he chose are mages. Mages are meant to rely on several forms of AoE to provide damage output to their team, but that common design staple doesn't make them all the same, mechanically or in their implementation. Anubis spent much of his lifespan as a more viable solo than a mid laner, and it's impossible to go very long without seeing a Poseidon jungle or ADC. You can play Ra in basically every role at almost any given point, no joke. My conclusion to this point would be that if a lack of diversity in the god pool is really the biggest problem that you have with Smite, I think you only need to dig a little deeper and get more creative with your experimentation and implementation to have more fun. Now, let's see how FUNKe wraps up his thoughts.
That's not to say, though, that the game isn't fun. Flying across the map as Thanatos, pulling off a successful Nazak combo string, deploying Titan as Cthulhu and taking up the entire lane. These are moments that leave a huge impression on the player and make them want to see what else they can do in the game. Things you can't really do in other MOBAs because they aren't designed with the same scale or speed in mind as this. I don't think I would have gotten into MOBAs in the first place if it wasn't for Smite creating such an accessible but more important fun version of the game mode that doesn't completely rip new players apart for not knowing the item meta. I like high-res games. They're a little derivative and janky, but they know what makes a game fun to play. Why the fuck is that toast flying? If you want to understand MOBAs without all the barriers to entry, this is a pretty good place to start. You'll spend a lot of time in Google Translate decoding verbal abuse, but eso es la mitad de la diversión. The 2 best things this game could do at this point is 1, rework the older gods who are fun but not very interesting, and 2, bring back Smite Car, come on!
I mostly agree, although I would argue that while Smite is perhaps the best way to get into the MOBA genre, I personally found it to be the best endpoint as well. Yeah, it's clear that Smite doesn't go into the same depth as other MOBAs in some ways, but I don't think that that solely contributes to its status as a great starter MOBA. The balance of complexity and reliable rule sets within the game make for an amazing play experience for both new players and veterans of the game. And I've barely mentioned how quickly Smite changes and adapts its meta while preserving the core ideas that make a MOBA great. Secondly, I think the blanket implication that older gods are more boring and that there are lots of gods waiting to be reworked in order to be fun is just false. Hi-Rez is hardly afraid to totally rework a god design that didn't pan out, but the nature of Smite is that the spotlight comes and goes for gods as the game changes. Item changes, map tweaks, new additions to the roster, and more all define how fun a god's average game is likely to be. And the last glaring thing that I absolutely have to mention is that
bring back Smite Car, come on!